speaker is entomologist Dino Martins. Dino is the CEO of the Turkana Basin Institute in Kenya and is passionate about pollinators. Dino.
All right. I'm going to start by telling you a story, and this is a story about, the origins of both bees and people. There are many wonderful stories across the world about how bees and people live together, how we have co-evolved, but this story comes from a part of Africa, and it's about the very beginning of the world. So in the beginning, the Creator breathes life into the world, and the first beings created are the bee and the praying mantis. I love this story because, of course, it has insects as central characters in it. And the bee and the praying mantis are sitting there in the darkness, and light is created, and they are sitting on the edge of the great ocean. Praying mantis is the messenger and has to cross the ocean. So bee carries praying mantis across the ocean, and it's a very long journey, and bee gets tired. But eventually, after struggling a lot, bee finds land, and they land there together. And as light and time come into being, the bee and the praying mantis plant a seed. And that seed is the very birth of humankind. So this ancient story shows us the knowledge and intimacy and connection we have with nature is not just a scientific side of our beings as humans, but also a very spiritual and a very cultural dimension as well. This slide shows you the bees in Turkana and the bees in Kakamega Forest. I grew up in Western Kenya, and I now work and live in northern Kenya. There are 500 species of bees in Turkana that we have found so far. There are 250 in Kakamega, in the rainforest. There's only one species in common between the two sites, even though they're both in the same country and not that big distance apart. So our relationship with bees has traversed many, many thousands of years. We've journeyed together, we've evolved together. We share a language, we can communicate. Bees actually have real language, referential communication. It's only evolved in bees and in humans. And as people, we have sought the blessings of bees, and we've also exploited them. My own journey in search of bees and wisdom has taken me in many different directions. And I want to share today it'll be a very personal story about my own journey of learning. But I have been very lucky to learn from both bees, from insects, from many wild creatures, but also from people. And the story I'm going to share with you today is a tale of four farmers in Kenya. Abdi Boru, Peter, Domina, and Esther. And from each of them, I'll pick one lesson. They've taught me many lessons. But I'd like to start with Domina. Domina is a farmer that is near Lake Victoria, and she's just one of the most incredible, energetic, kind people. And when I first started out, before I'd actually won a Whitley Award, I was working with my students on Domina's farm. And we discovered that she was growing a crop called the pigeon pea, which is a very important legume. Domina cultivated this crop in a remote area. It's a critically important resource because not only does it provide nutrition, once you harvest it, you can eat the young leaves, you can eat the young pods in a part of the world that doesn't have a lot of resources. We discovered that the two different kinds of bees, carpenter bees and leafcutter bees, were the ones who pollinated this crop. But really what we discovered is the way Domina looked after her land, because there was natural habitat around it. There were places for these bees, solitary bees, to nest in her own homestead, that her stewardship of that ecosystem is what created the habitat that allowed these bees to survive. And she did it with such energy and joy that I always thank and remember Domina for the lesson of joy. a very, very important lesson in conservation. That our world is filled with many wondrous things, and all of us as conservationists, all of us as human beings, are drawn to the detail of nature because it connects with something very deep and very real within us. And we need it as humans to survive. We cannot be isolated from it. Peter. Peter is a mango farmer in Western Kenya. Peter was also one of my students. Mangoes, one of my favorite fruits, and studying mangoes was a bit of a personal indulgence as well, because who won't love mangoes? On Peter's family farm, we had over 1,000 different pollinator species on one farm. All of them wild insects. Ants, bees, flies, stingless bees, wasps, butterflies, mosquitoes, all pollinating the mango. So people have often told me, Dino, you're trying to convince people to love insects and to cherish them. You're really pushing it with flies. But I'm like, well, think of it. No flies, in this case, no mangoes. What Peter was doing on his farm was the real lesson in you can look after land, you can control pests, you can manage a crop, and you can be productive. And Peter and his family had worked out ways of both protecting habitat and having a productive crop. And some of that involved trapping the pests rather than using pesticides, just being innovative, but really having a very deep knowledge and intimacy and involvement with their farm. And so, yes, you can actually even learn to love flies. Esther. Esther is a very, very dear friend in Western Kenya at Kakamega Forest. And Esther is a coffee farmer, and she is just incredible. Esther tends to each of her coffee bushes. She knows them individually. And coffee is one of those really important crops across the world. Actually originates in East Africa in the highlands of Ethiopia, and it has now turned into one of the drivers of the Western economy and society in general. But coffee in many places is pollinated by wild bees, by butterflies, and by a number of other insects. What we discovered working on Esther's farm is that several things she did, allowing the ground cover to persist, leaving areas of natural habitat around the farm, managing pests by knowing each bush and going out and pruning them when a very naughty insect called the coffee stem borer would come along and lay its eggs. Esther would go out the next morning and prune off the shoots where the coffee stem borer had laid its eggs and thwart its ability to cause damage in her crop. So she wasn't using a pesticide. But working with Esther, we discovered that not only did the pollinators impact the yield of the crop, they impacted the quality. And as all of you know, Kenyan coffee, it's some of the best coffee in the world. And to get that AA rating, 2 coffee beans inside a coffee berry need to have a connection with the kind of sex that the plant had. And bees are very good at providing those sorts of sexual services to the plants. And because of that mate choice that the bees enable through cross-pollination, you have 2 robustly formed coffee beans of high quality that earn the farmer money and increase improving their yield. In northern Kenya, which we've heard a little bit about and we will hear some more about, most of the landscape is very dry and it's very seasonal. Abdi Boru is one of the pastoralists. He's a member of the Rendile community, a small community who live really, really deep in the desert. And they live in probably one of the harshest landscapes. Temperatures often go up to 50 degrees Celsius, even get to 60 degrees Celsius in this particular part of the world. And without the camel, the Rendile community could not survive in this desert. Camels, it turns out, owe a lot to bees, not just people. So we say that 1 in 3 bites of food for people is thanks to a pollinator. Well, 9 out of 10 bites of food for a camel is thanks to a pollinator. And so working with Abdi and his community, we've learned that camels feed on many hundreds and hundreds of different species of plants. And without the seeds and the fruits and the dispersal and the interactions of all these species in this very harsh ecosystem, there would be no sustenance for camels and there would be no camel's milk. which is what the community here live off, as they have for many, many thousands of years. So those are just 4 lessons from 4 different people in northern Kenya. But what the Whitley Fund for Nature has enabled me to do has been to share this intimate knowledge about biodiversity. And it started out with the work on pollinators. I've grown it into other subject areas. And the reason I've been really committed to it is because of the support that I've had, but also growing up in a rural community. One of the things that we didn't have were a lot of books. And we certainly didn't have books that were written by people from that landscape. And having knowledge and having access to natural history information, which you do here in this country so well, is critical for getting young people to develop a nature brain, which we all have a nature brain. But if we don't develop it, we end up disconnected from the realities of the world. And we end up being poorer people in many ways, less human, because we evolved in these landscapes and we are very, very much part of them. My latest work has been on grasses, and everyone was like, grasses, Dino, really? You're going to write a book. I even managed to convince a publisher, and we convinced the publisher. And several remarkable things happened. So the publisher, were like, okay, Dino, we'll indulge you and we'll let you have this book. Really what I try to do is, through art and writing and science, is to tell the story, to say, you as a person have this incredible ability to go out and see detail. People think it's remarkable that I can identify hundreds of different butterflies and grasses and bees. Actually, it's not. All of us have that ability here. And all young people have that innate ability to see detail. It's a very deeply human thing that is extremely important. And when we learn to see detail, we learn about how the world works around us. We learn that we're one living thing among many. We learn that we have to be responsible to other forms of life, and we learn that we are connected to all these other living things. And I think this is one of the greatest gifts I've received through the Whitley Fund for Nature, is the ability to continue telling that story. You never know sometimes if you're having an impact, but little things come through. And with the book on grasses, I was giving a talk, and someone stood up and said to me, Dino, I actually have, it's a lady in the rural part of Kenya. Kenya is a very Christian country, and she had moved the Bible away from her bedside table and put the book of grasses next to it. And she said every night before she went to bed, rather than reading a Bible verse, she was reading one of the species descriptions. So I thought that for me means I've actually finally made an impact somewhere where I really, really needed to. So I'm going to end with another sort of little story here, but I have something to show and tell. So, my journey has taken me to so many different places, and one of the things I've really been privileged to be part of is by joining the Turkana Basin Institute, which was founded by Dr. Richard Leakey, and I'm now in the leadership role there. It's a huge, huge honor to do this. Richard was a dear, dear mentor to many of us young Kenyans in science and conservation. But Turkana is one of those parts of the world where we know we all came from. Earlier on, we talked about diversity. Well, the thing about diversity is that actually we are all Africans. All of us here are descendants of populations very recently migrated out of Africa. But if we went a little bit further back in time, we'll find something very interesting. This is it's a replica, but this is one of the first stone tools ever made. Stone tool technology was thought to be about 2.5 million years old, and we thought we knew which hominid lineage made it. These tools are 3.3 million years old, the very first evidence of tool-making material culture. They come from a part of Turkana in a time period where multiple different species coexisted of early humans. So we don't actually know which species of hominid or multiple species might have made it. But for me, it's a lesson about a change in time. 3.3 million years ago, by making these stone tools, we forever changed our relationship with nature. Because these early tools allowed us to grab more food, to start competing with predators, to start exploiting other sources that we had not yet been able to look at. And the rest, as they say, is history. It changed our relationship, but it also allowed us to be where we are today. All the technology, all the quality of life, all the good things we enjoy are thanks, to this amazing brain and to these amazing capabilities. So I'll end by saying, if we have one lesson we can learn, is that we have come so far, we've done so much, we couldn't have done it without nature. And what we need to do now is to recenter ourselves and to go back to the lessons from farmers and the lessons from bees. And the bees are still trying to teach us, so we just need to listen to them. Thank you.